Ken Jenkins joining me now. He's a professional emergency manager with extensive experience. He has built a remarkable track record successfully preparing for and responding to emergencies ranging from severe turbulence in the air to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Overall, he has responded to 12 fatal aviation accidents, prepares transportation companies to respond to an accident, as well as dealing with events like SARS, the pandemic flu, and yes, Ebola. Mr. Jenkins, welcome to the Chris Salcedo Show.
Hey, Chris. Good afternoon.
Okay, so let's talk about the many calls now as we have another case of Ebola, that these measures that Team Obama says, oh, no, we're going to take care of it. We've got it under control. We're going to put these measures into our airports. It fails to catch a doctor, of all people, who is symptomatic with Ebola and has Ebola and enters the United States without being properly checked. So let me ask you your opinion about travel bans, because the calls are getting louder for that to happen. Where do you sit?
Well, you know, I'm kind of on the fence on the travel bans, I have to admit. I'm kind of 50-50 either way. I don't believe, though, the government's done a great job, and when I say the government, I'm referring to the CDC in this particular case, of tracking and certainly instilling confidence in everyone and their processes and procedures. I mean, we just have to look at the last few weeks and see how things have been messed up. But I don't know that banning the flights is the best, because then we lose track of people. And so
you mean like this doctor in New York City who came in, we weren't banning flights, and we lost track of him.
Well, you're right, we did, and it's not so much him that I'm worried about, because he's the type of person, and nurses as well, that are also monitoring their symptoms, which he was, and when he found he had a fever, he immediately did something about it.
Now think about this. Now, how about this, Ken? What about the idea of saying, look, if you have a flight that is coming into the United States from the hot zone, the infected areas, you will automatically be quarantined for 21 days. Automatically. Now, remember, if you're an Ebola patient like patient 0 in Dallas, that's exactly what they want. They want to be treated medically and to save their lives. So nobody would go under the radar screen. And now, I should say nobody, unless they had ill intent of spreading Ebola here in the United States. And maybe that's what the administration's a little afraid of, that somebody will come in and want to slip under the radar. And that's why they don't want to institute a travel ban. But I would lay you dollars to donuts. They're already trying.
Well, and you're right, and we wouldn't know that if that was indeed the case. With Mr. Duncan, who was in Dallas, and I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and so it's been very interesting being right here in the throes of all of this, listening to what was going on. He didn't, and he wasn't forthcoming on his exit interview when he left his location about being in contact with anybody with Ebola. And so herein lies a problem is, and this is why I'm 50-50, is the processes that are established can work, Chris, but people have to be honest with their symptoms and what they're doing, and they're not. But
and that's the problem.
It is the problem.
And that's the problem. We can't rely on people and their honesty, because they have different agendas, whether it's to do harm to the United States of America or is to get their lives saved. I mean, they're going to have different agendas. So you're either going to have to institute a quarantine on the point of origin, which is the hot zones, and at the various airports, and they're not. I mean, everybody says, "Well, Africa's a big place." Yes, I know, but there are only as compared to the landmass, there are only a few airports that are capable of traveling to the United States. So you set up shop there. If you're traveling to the U.S., you have an automatic 21-day quarantine there, or an automatic 21-day quarantine here. I would say it would be better to have it over there, but if you're going to have one and they don't want to institute the travel ban, what's the matter with this quarantine?
Well, the reason that I think that it can be problematic is simply because you can have folks that could get into Africa and out without anyone knowing that they were in the country, and then they get on board a plane outside of that country into the United States, and we don't have any tracking of that they had been there. So, I mean, and yes, that can happen today. But I think it's less likely to happen today because there is no quarantine on flights. And so to that extent, then we wouldn't have an idea, we wouldn't be tracking anybody then. Yes, we would stop the flights out of the hot zone. That could be a beneficial thing. But then you're going to see an increase, I think, of people who enter into one of those hot zone countries and out without anyone knowing they were in there. They're certainly not going to tell anybody they were when they come into the United States. And because they're not from one of those hot zone areas, no one's going to be looking for them anyway.
But right now, Ken, we've got a situation where nobody's being checked, nobody's being tracked. So having no barriers in the way, or having some barriers in the way would be better, would be preferable, in my opinion, to having no barriers.
Well, they are supposed to being checked, and this is where the process breaks down, Chris. And I don't know where this doctor was within that, but because he was in one of the impacted areas, anybody coming in from those countries were supposed to be being followed up on a daily basis for 21 days. So why wasn't that why wasn't that happening in this particular case for him?
Because the state of New York didn't implement these procedures to take place until next Monday, or this coming Monday. So the procedures weren't in place, and we wouldn't be dealing with this. Yeah, well, we wouldn't be dealing with this whole thing if we didn't take, our thousands of troops that are overseas right now, we're told, combating Ebola, had not set up shop at the area's airports and set up a mandatory quarantine. And I understand, but understand this too, Ken Jenkins. Ken Jenkins, my guest, by the way. He's a professional emergency manager with extensive experience at this kind of thing. Keep in mind, too, that the neighboring countries around Sierra Leone and Liberia and all these areas that are hotbeds, they have closed down their borders. They have said nobody comes in. And a travel ban, if you will, and it seems to be working like a dream over there on the continent. So what makes us think that we cannot implement some common sense restrictions here in the United States?
Well, I'm all for common sense restrictions. I think that when we're looking at this from a 30,000-foot view, what most folks, and doctors included, are looking at are the number of passengers that are coming in from those countries, and it's not very high. It's only 150, which seems awfully low to me. I am somewhat suspect of that number as well. So I think they're looking from a risk perspective of saying it's only 150. We're starting to screen at those particular locations. One, as an exit interview when they leave those countries, and then an entrance interview when they come into the country, and we're going to start tracking those folks as they come in. And the bigger hit, if you will, is what they're trying to accomplish is to eradicate Ebola in the hot zones, as you were mentioning before. Nigeria has been very successful in doing that.
Well, I don't know that tracking stops the spread. Yeah, the CDC doesn't have to do all their homework and figure out who these individuals have been in contact with if they do come down with Ebola, but the whole idea is to not allow Ebola to spread. And so tracking them is all well and good, so that means you have a pretty good idea of who's been exposed, but that's that's kind of like letting the genie out of the bottle, and I'm not in favor of letting that genie out of the bottle.
Well, and if we do, let's say that the flights are quarantined, then also keep in mind, then there is no, yes, we may reduce the number of people, or we do stop the people coming in. I don't think that that's going to stop potential cases appearing in the future, but it also stops being able to send healthcare workers and folks like that to those impacted countries to help. And I was reading just before the show today that there are even doctors that are questioning whether or not a quarantine would be the best thing to do or not. And some say, as you mentioned, as people arrive, quarantine them for 21 days. Well, where do you do that, first of all? And because the population would just continue to increase in that location wherever you're quarantining them. And then other doctors are saying it doesn't make sense to do that because no one can spread it if they're asymptomatic. So, I still look back on everything that's happened over the last few weeks, Chris, and when I look at the CDC and the nurse that flew, for example, to Cleveland, is how did that even happen?
I know, and that we're asking ourselves those same questions too. Not to mention the one that got on the cruise ship. Not to mention, it's crazy. Ken, where can folks go if they want to look up what it is that you do?
They can certainly check my website, which is kenjenkinsllc.com.
KenJenkinsLLC.com. Ken Jenkins, I'm just up against the clock here, buddy. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.